to the series where we talk about this book, Hacking Kubernetes, Threat-Driven Analysis and Defense. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 6, which is storage. Chapter 6 basically has two flavors. It talks about like storage and volumes and file systems and all the technical aspects of that, as well as, different parts that can theoretically be abused. And it also talks about just secrets in Kubernetes. And so I found myself just more interested in talking about secrets and where they're stored and how to attack them. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Just a reminder, this is an informal discussion, I wrote an article, as I do for all these chapters. It's over my Medium, and there is a link down below if you want to really get into it, but this is just me talking. So let's talk about secrets in Kubernetes and how to steal them. So I'm at chapter 6 in this book, and it's really clear that Kubernetes has some dangerous default settings. And I don't want to paint it just like a, wow, this is so stupid kind of thing, because there's a reason for it. Kubernetes is complicated. It has a lot of complicated moving parts that touch a lot of other complicated moving parts. I mean, it's basically a technology for making supercomputers, when you think about it. It's complicated. So why make it any more complicated, right? Let's make the defaults as accessible as possible. One of those dangerous defaults, accessible defaults, is the default service account. And that's what we kind of learned about in this chapter. So the default service account, which is literally called default, it can make API calls. So let's say you hack a container and you land in the pod, a container that's in a pod, which is just like in general the attack scenario that we start off talking about when it comes to Kubernetes. You have a shell in your container, that container is in a pod, and you can make API calls because you're authenticated as the default user. So that's a lot of access. With API calls, you can possibly, depending on other configurations, you can create pods. You can mount those pods onto the node's root file system. You can become root on the node, yeah. Now for that to happen, it would have to be like a string of bad misconfigurations, of course. But I mean, using the API, you could also do more simple things, like you could, or using not the API, but using the service account token that's stored by default inside of the pod. You could, according to the book, you could maliciously make mundane network requests to authorize with cloud IAM services. This can give access to SQL, hot and cold storage, machine images, backups, the keys to the castle, basically. Now, the viability of that attack specifically, I'm not sure. They talk about it theoretically in the book, but I suppose it makes enough sense to me. Yeah, there's a lot of trust. There's a lot of trust by default in a Kubernetes cluster, basically. And then it's kind of up to the user, the DevOps person, the developer, to harden the cluster. And this chapter is just basically another iteration of that. It's like we look at the dangerous defaults. We talk a little bit about how they can be abused, and a little bit about how they can be hardened. I'm really interested to see, I guess, where most companies land, on the secure to available, like, spectrum, like over here, it's really easy for developers to pump out new features and do all the stuff that is included in their job because there's no security. And then over here with a ton of security, VPN, physical RSA keys, seccomp profiles and restricted system calls, and you name it, it's harder for developers to do their job. And then also these security things that come in the pods, or that that come with they might affect the application, they might block the application in unexpected ways, and they require maintenance themselves. So new code requires maintenance. Every line of code that's written requires maintenance. But then also when you have code as security or security as code, then that requires maintenance as well. And that makes it, on this side of the spectrum, makes it really hard for developers to do their job. So where do most companies land? I'm really curious about that. I have no way of answering that question right now, from my desk, from my office. But I mean, it's, I wonder, are most clusters extremely vulnerable, which they would be by default, or are most clusters hardened? I don't know. Alright, this has been chapter 6. If you want to actually, learn some stuff about what this chapter was about, then just go over to my Medium article, which is about this book, chapter 6. It's down below. This is just the discussion. So, okay, peace. Have a good one. Stay sharp and never stop learning.